Welcome to Resiliency, the podcast, the place for stories, strategies, and inspiration on how to embrace change, overcome challenges, and redefine resilience in today's ever-evolving world. If you are interested in resiliency, we invite you to like or subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you may be finding us today. I am your co-host, Jen Quater. I am a professional strategic communicator and CEO of a company called The Smart Agency. And I am joined by my wonderful, amazing co-host, Dr. Kelly Culver. And today I have the great honor of welcoming an amazing guest. Guys, I honestly, buckle up. This is a really exciting episode because today's guest has been described as part entrepreneur, part corporate animal. That is a 5-star review if I've ever heard one, and I'm excited to dive in. He has a number of broad-ranging and really world-impacting careers. First, he was the head of 4 national newspapers, including News of the World and News UK. Then he started one of the very first app companies, Chelsea Apps Factory. And now, through his company called Dot, he offers consultancy and mentoring for businesses and individuals who want to adapt, learn, and grow, which sounds a lot like our resilience trinity that Dr. Culver speaks about a lot. So without any further ado, please welcome this global trendsetter and pacemaker and amazing individual, Mr. Mike Anderson. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Mike, we're super excited to have you, and thanks for agreeing to be a guest on our podcast. Now, we're a global podcast. We're listened to in over 5 continents. So where are you today?
So I'm calling you from my international headquarters, aka my home office, here in Cobham, Surrey, in England.
And I happen to be based in London, England at the moment. Jen, where are you?
We're just below LA in Mission Viejo. And I have to point out, though, Mike, did you say you're in Surrey? Okay. The only reason I know that is because one of my very favorite movies in the world is called The Holiday. And she talks about how Cary Grant was from Surrey.
Oh, yes.
So I must point out.
I am the father of 3 daughters and have rinsed that movie so many times. And they filmed it down the road from here. They filmed it in a place called Sheer. And every time somebody mentions Sheer, they go, "Oh, the holiday,
well,
the holiday."
Now I really, before we got into the recording, I said I'm going to have to come visit you. Now I'm really going to have to come visit you. I would love to see the set of The Holiday. So amazing. You live in a global place.
It is a beautiful little place.
I want to ask this question because to me, I'm someone who, I have my undergrad is in journalism, and then I work in the PR world. You worked, you had 4 global newsrooms you were running. So, and you brought in the question of honesty. So I want to ask the question about resilience and the news, and about finding truth through the news, and how, and again, I'm asking this in a really big broad stroke way. I'm not asking you to get specific, but just in a broad stroke way, as someone who's run this business and now sees others, how are we doing on honesty in the news, and how have you seen the news be resilient? What do you see as true resilience in the news business right now?
Well, the first thing is that people outside of those organizations always assume that we're conspiracy theorists and running around sharing false information. In fact, there's more false information because things are not as regulated as they were. Things are not as structured as they were. Things are not as fact-checked as they were. Right? So, it was. And I should be clear here, I was not a journalist. I was effectively the publisher. I realized I couldn't be a journalist when, the source of, say in tabloid publishing, okay, people would literally be stood round the block wanting to tell you who they slept with at the weekend on a Monday morning, right? Now, if that's, okay, we paid for those stories, okay? We paid for those stories. But that was, you know, what you do realize in that world, if you like, is that people will sell their granny to tell you something or to self-promote themselves or do whatever, right? Which isn't a particularly great human thing to see, right? But that is true. The second thing is there were loads of checks and balances around what was factually correct, and you know, every effort was made to ensure that that's the case. That's the truth of it. That is the truth of it. It wasn't, oh, we're struggling for a story, somebody make something up, right? There were fact checks. There are fact checks on the established broadcasters. They're fully aware of all the legal implications of misrepresentation and so on and so forth. And my job a lot of the time was to work out whether we would or wouldn't get shut down on something that was a real story, you know. So if you and what people tend to forget, and it's an interesting one. Have you seen the movie Spotlight?
No, I haven't.
So Spotlight is an expose by an investigative journalistic team. I think it was in Chicago or Boston. It was in Boston. And they exposed the priests who were being pedophiles and then being protected by the church. Okay? If a publisher had not funded that investigation, that story would have never come out. These people would still be operating, right? And people forget about that stuff, okay? The reason that nurses were getting better paid is not because the government, it's because the media turned on them and said these people need to be properly looked after, right? The reason there are more police, the reason there are more, all these kind of things, a lot of them are born out of the media's, to be that kind of fourth state thing about, so there's a lot of good stuff that happens because it's part of a democratic structure, right? And the general purpose of people is to do good. It is to do good, right? And it's not to let's circulate non-factually correct false information. That's not how these organizations work or the structure that they were in. Did things happen? Were mistakes made? Oh, definitely. Right? Did people, lose the plot in terms of their own ambition, perhaps? To maybe, present their story in a way that said I've done all the necessary checks and balances and so on and so forth. Sure, right? But the overriding culture wasn't one of let's make it all up, guys, right? Because it doesn't matter, And there was a great tagline in the News of the World, which was they used it in the two examples actually in the News of the World that were positive things. One was they had this tagline which was all human life lives here, right? And that was everybody from the successful to the vicar. I've got a thing. I'm not having a go at religious people here. I've noticed now I've made two references to religious things and stuff, okay? But you know what I mean, the kiss me quick story, okay? To the thing, all right? So there's that bit. The other thing actually, which is true of newspapers in the olden days, was that they used to run a thing called I think it was called the Henderson Bureau, and it basically was the fact checker of the day, where people would write to the papers and say, is this true about this? Is this true about that? Can I get advice for this? Can I get advice for that? Which of course they can now get from Google. But that's what the relationship those publications had in those days before all those things. So it gets dramatized as something else, but it's not. It's not that. It's that the main purpose is to do good. And I worry actually with the demise of some of those brands and their power and their influence. I'm not sure it's necessarily a good thing, because who's policing the misinformation, right? And there's a lot of it around, and I don't think it's a better solution than the one we had, you know. And then how do those people, people own these publications for the power and influence, right? For their own political beliefs, and sure, there's all of those kind of things. But there's also a lot of good, as I say, like in the investigative journalistic team, which would take somebody 2 years to uncover, investigate, so on and so forth. All that got financed, to ensure that wrongs were righted, and there are countless examples of that. And Spotlight, the movie, was pretty real, actually, in terms of how that came around, and how they managed to challenge the system, get the information, expose, and so on and so forth.
I think you bring up a huge point about resiliency in the role of media, because I think that you're right. There is a deterioration of belief in the media, because there is this belief of kind of what you just said, that people are making things up to get to an end. And I think politics plays a lot within that. But I'm reminded, too, you brought up the movie Spotlight, but I'm reminded, and I can't think of his name right now, but the very horrible man who was the big thing with underage assault in Palm Beach. That was all started by Palm Beach Post journalists. Was his name I can't remember his name. The horrible man.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was all started by like the local paper. So I think you bring up a really important point, again, from a standpoint of global listeners who are maybe asking themselves, like, what should I listen to? What's real? How can I decipher between these organizations that are good, that are trying to tell these stories, and as you said, are sometimes the pivotal key that makes things happen. It's why nurses are getting raises. So I think there is a power of the media story that's not being told in the mainstream media. What would you say to someone who said to you, like, hey, I don't know what to trust. Where do I go? How do I find this resilience in the news today?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I don't know where. I actually have done some work with a business called the News Movement, who was founded by a guy called Will Lewis. Will Lewis is a previous editor of the Daily Telegraph. He's currently editor of the Washington Post, working with Jeff Bezos. He was editor of the Wall Street Journal. And he was on, or is on, a mission to see how he can get Gen Zs engaged in the news, right? And I'll take my hat off to Will in his ability to fundraise, because through his network, he just went to billionaires and say, are you irritated by the fact that your kid is constantly on their phone and not paying attention to anything you say? Yes, I am. Okay. Do you think that there any understanding of what's going on in the world today? Yes, I agree. It's okay. Give me $15 million. I'm going to try and solve this problem. And they wrote checks out, right? And it was the best pitch I'd ever seen. I thought, this is brilliant. But it was a real problem. But here's the issue. Well, thinking, how do I get this generation engaged in the news? And what they're going to believe in? What's the trust? So he's trying to take news items. It's worth going to see the News Movement. It does uses an Instagram and TikTok style of presentation of the news. Okay. The one thing as well I would say of news organizations today, they do pivot all the time. They do follow trends. They do embrace technology. They do, yes, they got, the internet, out of it. The New York Times has a very successful subscription business. The Times has a successful subscription business. It's difficult with advertising, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. But the thing is that they pivot and find opportunities. But here's the funny thing, right? So we take the news movement as an example. They set up they do a deal with the Press Association. They have a studio in London, a studio in New York. They hire a bunch of Gen Zs, and they go out and they create and they gather the news and story and present it in that style. And they've had some success in gathering an audience for that, right? And people getting into it. And then you see lots of copies of it, aping that kind of stuff. But the number one thing I think on YouTube was some guy who was just reading the news, right, from all sources, right, who then has a 50 million audience, right? So you go, okay, well, if you're the high ground of let's make sure people can at least consume the news, and all the thinking about style and process and what channels and how you use them, and then you go into random person kicks off a YouTube channel, works the system well, gets, and suddenly is the global contact point for that generation. And what they're doing, they're just basically reading the news. That's all they're doing, watching the news and reading it. And you go, oh my God, right?
Look, you couldn't have better explained the intersection of all your worlds, Mike. The intersection of news and apps and entrepreneurship is exactly what you just explained. Because they're having to change. Boy, I don't envy the news organizations, because they're having to pivot and imagine what that next app might look like. Like, they can't even create for today's apps. They have to really be thinking ahead. What will the next TikTok be? Where will that next thing go? That's my impression of how to survive.
But well, you're sure, and but who's doing the fact checking? Who's doing the investigation? Who's doing the right? That's the journalists today. That's the process. And thankfully, the journalistic schools and everything else, they know it's about check, right? So, and obviously the newsreader who's become the most popular person, but he doesn't write the story, do the necessary journalistic work, right? And I don't know. I mean, I have a belief based on nothing other than instinct, and I actually want to talk about instinct in a minute. Okay, that at some point we will welcome being edited, right? Because one of the things that was good about newspapers, say, long gone, and nobody buys them these days to any great extent, and a much older generation. But what was good is you knew your way around a newspaper. It was familiar. You knew where the news, the international news, the headlines, the puzzles, the sport, and there was an order to it. Okay, and it was one thing I'd say: go and buy a newspaper and have a reading experience with it. It's quite nice. I've forgotten what that feels like, right? Anyway. I think people would enjoy an edited package of things, because that's just is consumable. Digitally, you don't know quite where you are. Whether you're in a lifestyle section, a news section, a sports section, whatever. So that's quite interesting. And I do think somebody wants an edited version. I quite like Apple's news thing, because that takes from various sources, and that's certainly part of the answer. The other thing is this, and there's a collision of two worlds. Okay, the newspaper business in the 80s, 90s, noughties, it was an instinct-driven business, right? You would never get an editor to look at any piece of research. You do research and you would try and present it, and they would say to you, listen, I understand my readers. I know what they want. Don't bring your mumbo jumbo in here. Okay? There was a resistance to it like you wouldn't believe. Okay? And I used to go and present the numbers that I thought we were going to achieve as a business and say the circulation that we were going to achieve. And how we put those numbers together was, practically the back of a cigarette packet, based on instinct and experienced people who knew. Okay, and the accuracy by which we predicted the outcomes was pretty good, actually. Right? We knew if we moved the price to here, if we did this, we made these available, we increased availability, we knew the levers, and we could pretty accurately predict what the outcome was going to be, right? And it's hugely an instinct-driven business. When I got into digital and apps and everything, I came across a thing called data-driven decisioning. Right at the start of that, right? And actually, what I was doing was working with gaming and gambling companies, right, who were early adopters of technology. You know, technology is always adopted by two particular industries, okay? And I came into this world of a science fest of data-driven decisioning. And what I concluded was that was really impressive, and I wished I'd been able to bring more of that into my old world of instinct, right? And we would have maybe done some smarter things than just pure instinct. And now you're in a world where data drives everything. And what I think is missing is instinct, right? Because you need to find the blend of instinct and data-driven. And if you can do that, that's a magic, right? And I've seen both of those worlds operate, right? Where you overanalyze to death, literally, where you talk yourself out of doing anything innovative or new or different because you send it down to a working group who will crunch it to death and then tell you 57 reasons why that will never work, right? And I'm not sure that's always the answer either. I think that somebody needs to be brave, somebody needs to make a decision, somebody needs to follow their instincts, right? Because that's how good things get done. But you don't let one outweigh the other. I think there's a magic blend of instinct and data-driven.
I see the piece on instinct. I'm so glad that you brought that up. We talk a bit about instinct, and with other people that we've had on Resiliency, the podcast. Instinct, it's like it's your North Star, and people aren't listening to that North Star. That is their instinct, and when they're faced with disruption, chaos, uncertainty, and all of the, and particularly all of the uncertainty we've had globally in the last 4 or 5 years, professionally and personally, people freeze and they stop listening to that inner voice of their instinct and their North Star. And they want that data in front of them because they lack that confidence, that bravery, that, put on your pants of steel today and take a decision and act. I see it around me all the time.
Well, and I also think you said something about, you kind of said something about magic, right? Like you talked about how the instinct itself is what makes that, and good things come from following that. And it's just interesting you talk about this because I run a PR marketing business, and we do have some clients that still come and say, I want to know that every story you place, like who calls me off that story. And that's not the best client for us. And I'll tell them that because the amount of data you'd have to somehow have access to in a magical world to be able to prove that, A, you won't have that level of access, but B, by the time you have that level of access, you've micro-focused. And so what I'm trying to say is it's the energy around getting the story, and we call that felt impact. And so I'm talking about, the end result of it, which is, how the company might grow with it. But when you are the leader who has to make the decision, I really like your idea that there has to be a blend, because sometimes, depending upon the size of my company, even though the world is filled with all these data decisions I could make, do I really have all the best data? isn't some of it locked away where I can't actually get to it? So I
Yeah.
think people, to your point, Dr. Culver, they're freezing. And I guess I wonder, Mike, are you seeing that? Are you seeing people who are kind of boggled by data, who are freezing and not at all even able to kind of connect with their own instinct anymore? Is that happening?
Well, I'm going to answer that am I seeing that? Uh, I, that was a broader question about how people kind of interact, right? And the example I'll use is that uh, we launched a couple of new projects. I go into a room of marketing and salespeople, and they hoop and holler before I've even said what we're doing, okay? And it's a really energizing environment, okay? I go to a bunch of developers and I tell them this exciting news, and the room is a deadly silence. And people are staring at their shoes, and most of them think, I don't really give a shit, right? And it's extraordinary, right? Now, I got quite good at hiring developers. It's always the person that never looked me in the eye and stared at their shoes and gave me the limpest handshake. I thought, we're hiring this guy. He's brilliant, right?
Love
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Career advice. I dig it.
But the world needs. I've got I operate in both as well. So I'm by nature generally an enthusiast of most things I see. Most startups that come to me show me their ideas and everything else. I'm on the ceiling with happiness and joy about their idea, their creativity, their hope, the promise, and everything else. Okay, I know that's a strength and a weakness. So what I then do is I send my decks and information to my people who are not that, who I would say suck their teeth at most things, right? And I know as I'm sending them, the deck, I'm going, I know that Willie's going to look at this and go, what rubbish is this he's up to now? What a load of rubbish, this idea, stupid damn thing, that'll never work, so on and so forth, right? But they're my counterbalance, okay? And I respect them for being that way, right? And I want them to be that way. I don't want them to be, the happy chappy. That there used to be an old thing in sales about beware of Mr. Happy, and but you counter that. So you respect it, you go to it, you use it for the value it can bring, the reasoning, and you accept that it may come back with as much as I accept that I may be overinflating the enthusiasm, I'll try and build, this is an instinct thing, I'll try and build in a factor for the doer Scots person, let's call them that, or whatever, the doer person who's on the other end of that decision, and say, okay, I'll allow a 10% of doerness in there, right? To then decide whether I want to progress. And sometimes, their arguments are very compelling and fair enough, and not every idea works. But so I suppose am I seeing anything in particular? Well, you just learn to play to the personality types and respect them. I think the thing that I would say as an older person, I've learned to respect that more than I did as a hot-headed young, go-getting, quite arrogant person. Really, if I reflect, right? I thought, I don't know what I thought, but anyway, what I like about the older me is that I am more respectful of people, different styles, different opinions. I see, the limp handshakers are actually very useful people, and the world needs people like that. And you learn to get the best out of people like that, and think, why, not everybody's happy clappy, and so I suppose that's what you learn, isn't it? Different types, different folks, but everybody's got something to contribute, and without them, I see people that you recognize skills in people that you know you don't have.
Yes.
You know, and you go, God, I'm not like that, and I'm just not that sort of person. But you know, they are very good at doing that thing, and if you want to do that thing, you need somebody like that to do it. And thank God I found that person
and
who's
you have
going
to
to
have
do
enough
it.
self-awareness and wherewithal and humbleness to be able to say I need that, you know, I can't do all of that, you know. I need to surround myself with that. I want to ask you, based on that perception, though, of these very different people, your Mr. Happy in the marketing room and your guy with the limp handshake, the developer, and yet all of them are working toward this
Yeah.
goal. When you are doing consultancy and mentorship, what are the strategies that you might teach them? And would it be the same to help them be resilient? You know, when we're bringing this back toward resilience and having them keep moving, keep being brave, trust instinct, how do you help? What strategies do you teach to these entrepreneurs, knowing that they're very different personalities?
Yeah. Okay. So current thinking, fad of the week on that thing, right, is this. There. So if you're encouraging free-spirited entrepreneurial innovation, creativity, you don't want frameworks, right? Because frameworks make people who are like that feel like they're inhibited. Okay? But what you can do is, you personally, and I do have frameworks mentally in my head. I do have, you know, things I go, okay, let's talk about, you know, finding the truth. Let's talk about what the real deal is. Let's talk about what the nice things that we have. But I don't present them in frameworks, okay? If I'm dealing with the other type, then I do bring frameworks into the room because they need it for comfort, right? They need to see that structure. They need to see that it's not, I'm not asking them to be anything other than themselves, right? And so I'll use it in a more structured way with that type of person to say, okay, we've got a 5-step process. I'm going to walk you through these things. We're going to spend some time doing that, you know, and we're going to frame the conversations in a more solid kind of way. There's a, you know, because they need that in order to respond. And so, in fact, when I sort of talk about mentoring to the entrepreneurial spirit, I say, look, I've got frameworks and they're used appropriately, you know, because it's funny, okay? The person who might buy you as a mentor, say in a corporate, I've got to judge whether they're a free thinker or a structure. So I've got to write a document that plays to that, okay? I've got to play to that. Look, don't worry, this is a, you know, because you get people who are loved all this stuff and you get people who don't like it, you know, and they want to buy it in a very ordered structure. So there's, I suppose, one of the things you talk to a lot of businesses about is, how do I make myself easy to buy? And therefore recognizing your audience, the people that you're serving, and what they need from you, you know, and play to those things. I think it's been it's interesting when you're looking to help people, and obviously there's a purpose and thing about doing that, but you got to, I find a lot of mentors or coaches are quite self-reflecting, you know. Oh, I'm this, I'm that. I used to, you know, I'm a mentor because I used to have a job for 40 years. Yeah? We've all had jobs for 40 years, you know, that what is it you bring to the table? What is it you're super about? What is the thing you think you genuinely do, you know? And they don't often think about the customer, if you like, or the client, you know. So it's always quite important to get that perspective of, so you play to, as I've said, you know, some are structured, some are less so. Your instincts will tell you where you think you are, and I blend that conversation to, please be reassured, there's a structured program, there's a 12 steps, right? Or listen, I can bring them along, but we don't have to use them.
All right. I had a question about the framework because you were talking about, and I am learning a lot from this because I'm someone who, again, I'm growing up, I acquired a company in 2018 and I immediately started trying to set up training programs and I started to find out, oh, not everyone responds to training the same way. So it's similar to what you're saying, which is that certain types,
Yeah.
But I want to ask this, Mike, you mentioned you have 3 daughters and I want to ask, when you're helping business people become resilient, do you use the same tools to help your kids become resilient, or is there any difference in how you approach that?
My girls have got innate strengths, but I'm not sure I taught them those things. I certainly didn't consciously run them through the flip charts, right? And say, hey guys, this is what you do. I don't know where they got from their mother or I or something. They've all got a good work ethic. Don't know why they have, right? It's great. I haven't had to parent about that. I think they've parented each other. Now, obviously, I lost my wife when they were all quite young, and but they've amazed me in terms of how, and obviously this is a thing about they're more resilient than you give them credit for. Okay, in that scenario, just to sort of say that I couldn't be the mum, but I knew how to be a dad, right? And the thing that I found quite interesting at the school gate was I couldn't fuss because there was too much going on, right, between the balance. And actually, that was not a sort of, oh, I'm not going to fuss about them too much and they'll work themselves out. But my dad saying, get on with it, But they were amazingly resilient. I was more anxious and upset than they were upset, but they anxious about them sort of coping and so on and so forth. But they were extraordinarily resilient. And I think sometimes we fuss around them too much and don't allow them to express any kind of resilience because we want to disenable them by taking care of everything for them. Do you know what I mean? And I think that you do need to let people kind of walk into a few scenarios and kind of get themselves through it. You want to be there for them, but you don't want to do it for them, And I think that's the same in business with mentoring is definitely very different to coaching in the sense that mentoring is quite directional, or at least my style is quite directional, right? And I think that's my style. If you want that, you get that from me. It's partly because I want to be accountable for what I'm saying, all right, and what I'm advising, if you're asking me for that advice, and therefore I want to be quite directional about it. And I make sure that I used to say, look, I'm not one of those mentors that pulls his chin and philosophizes. It's not my style. That might suit you, doesn't get me, right? And I like to have real action points at the end of sessions that say, here's the next. By the time we meet again, there are these responsibilities on me as your mentor and you as a mentee. So we make progress, so that it's a worthwhile thing. I hate anyone to think, well, I'm not sure what I got out of that.
Well, there's this level of self-directedness that you're speaking about in both cases, both in the mentorship case and in the parent case, which, my heart goes out to your girls who I can see, had something very huge in their lives to deal with. But then, as you said, without making a fuss, by stepping back, and perhaps you were directional there too, I would suggest, that perhaps you were able to show them where to look, and then you trusted them enough to step back. And the comment I was going to make is, again, earlier, as I was growing myself in the business world, I started to find, and I do believe this was generational, there was this generation of people who, they'd come interview for a job and then their parent would call you and be like, hey, why didn't my child get the job? Or why did I had one where the kid was let go and and I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Why is so I think
Yeah.
there's really an interesting point to be made in like, please let your kid be resilient on their own. If they don't get the job, let them find out why. Please don't, go call and find out for them.
No, sure. Yeah.
Wasn't just in private
No,
sector, Jen. I saw that in government all around the world.
Wild.
Same thing. It's like helicopter parenting.
Well, and
and that what I think a lot of parents would hate to hear about that is that if you were analyzing that, you'd say, well, what you've just done is disabled your child.
Amen. You removed their resiliency.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that really what you wanted to do? Did you want them make so unable to cope with life and themselves that you've just left them swimming in this pool with that is just such a bad move. But we all do it in our own way. I think the thing is that, please don't think I don't profess to lots of mistakes with my children, and they would tell you them for sure, right? And but what I would say is they are who they are because of themselves, and if I did anything, is I let them be themselves, without necessarily practicing on a mission for that, but because of life and challenges and jobs and trying to organize things and make life good, they somehow got sort themselves out quite well, and I'm blessed with that. And but I'm not here to say here's a great strategy for parenting.
Very few people I think would want to say they were the number one parent. And I would also say I'm not really wagging fingers just at parents either, because I think you spoke to, from a business standpoint, how if you approach people in a way that doesn't allow them to be who they are, whether you're a parent or whether you're a boss or whether you're a mentor, you are in some ways restricting the ability for them to be resilient. And I think whether that is you, as you talked about, knowing that this person needs an entrepreneurial push and this person needs a framework, or whether it's knowing to step back, it sounds like there is a lot of benefit to being able to give people the space they need to find that resiliency. I heard a quote recently, I'm probably going to say it wrong, but they were saying like the best parents are the ones who they don't make their child into anything. They just watch what they support what their child is there to become. And I think you could say the same of employees. It's letting people show their own superpower, as I guess what I would think. What do you think of that, Mike and Dr. Culver?
I think that's so true. And I'll tell you a wee story, if I may. I'm going to bang my gums now. I went on a study tour of best practice in America with a company who I really rate, and what they do is they take executives. This is when in a corporate world where they would pay for me to go on these best practice learning thing, and I spent a week going around America's best practice businesses, and it was fantastic. Started in Boston, ended in LA, flew across the country in the course of a week, and went to Apple, went to Cisco, went to Southwest Airlines, all these business case studies, right? And fired with enthusiasm, I came back with all these ideas that I'd seen. One of which was a thing about recruit for attitude and we'll teach the skills. Okay? And I loved this. I was totally sold on this concept. So I boldly march into the office and say, we're doing this, guys. We're going to recruit for attitude and we're going to teach the skills. Okay? We don't want any fancy CVs or anything else. It's all attitude. So we go about it quite sensibly. We set up a bunch of interview. We tell everybody, we advertise in Metro, this was when we started Metro, no killer CV required. If you've got the right aptitude, we're the guys for you, kind of thing, right? And and this was in London, and we had people turning up on a Saturday in a church hall and going through a series of interviews to sort of qualify. And what I ended up doing was hiring most of the Antipodeans in London. Okay, I had Aussie, South African, Kiwis. Okay, we were all full of gusto and yeah, no problem, man, we'll smash it. Okay, and then what happened was we get them in. Okay, we get them in, and I go, how's it going? Oh, Mike, we've got these great guys and girls are just buzzing of fantastic attitude. I say, okay, right, what about the teach the skills? And we all looked at each other. Oh, we don't have that program. We don't have that program. So basically, what we did is let them get going, okay? And I ended up calling it the recruit for attitude and hope to Christ you've got some skill, okay? Right. 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 And you know what? They did pretty well. They survived. Okay? Right? And then of course we got about setting ourselves up, right? But that's the sort of, people can do it. People can do it if they've got that kind of, And we didn't say, oh, are you resilient and can cope with no support or training in a job in a country you don't even come from, and you're going to smash it here, So I suppose the moral of that story is that you got to think things through more. That was the over enthusiastic that was the instinct without the data. Okay, that was the outcome. Okay, so the data bit might have been a bit more like, okay, let's think about this. What program are we gonna put them through? Yeah. So so that, I don't know if that answers your question, but you reminded me of that.
It answers beautifully, my word. Oh, I'm so enamored with really everything that you've talked about, Mike. I feel like we've learned a ton from you. And I feel like we could talk for hours, it seems, because I think there's a lot more to learn. But I know that Kelly has some fun rapid fire questions that she wants to get you to. I guess I want to ask you, Mike, before Kelly goes into that, is there anything we haven't asked you about or anything you were hoping to be able to bring up as it relates to resiliency before we dive into our rapid fire questions?
No, look, I've really enjoyed the conversation and the questions, and in preparing, I gave it some thought, and I got to that place of it's an innate thing that we've got that you guide people to find. And I think if I reflect on how I mentor people, I listen, I absorb, and then I sort of play back and sort of, often I take people back to, okay, let's remember day one in this company. How did you feel? What did you want to achieve? Where was all that ambition? Where was all that excitement? Where was all that fizz, And sometimes you lose that on your journey. So I think it's always a good thing to kind of go back to that day one kind of place. Because you believe, I once met somebody who was an extraordinary woman who ran an organization called the Delancey Street Foundation. I don't know if you know about it, in San Francisco. This is actually on that study tour, which was an incredible thing. And she ran the business was the biggest seller of Christmas trees on the West Coast. Right. They built a community that they lived in. They ran restaurants, they ran a t-shirt printing business, they ran a badge making business, and so on and so forth. And every employee was an ex-con, all right. And she'd come out of the working in the government in the prison service. Right? She was a professor, a very interesting person. But the thing that she told me that really landed was she had this thing about, because when you lived in where I went to the place that she'd built in San Francisco on the water with all these people who had built them, by the way. She had this thing about teach somebody a good thing, teach them the ability to teach somebody else, right? That was a really interesting thing. They built the place themselves. The ex-cons had built the place, ground up, right? Even though she had the Bank of America financing and saying, we want a contractor, we want somebody who knows what they're doing, she did all this. She lived in this cathedral, basically. But the other thing which I loved, and I use, is that she had this thing about stay stupid, all right? And I said, that's interesting. What do you mean? She said, because if you stay stupid, you believe anything's possible. Right? And I quite like that. Right? So I think let's go back to the stay stupid and believe I can get out of this. I can solve this problem. I can be, and then in reflection, you want to call it resilience.
I'm in love.
Right?
I want to stay stupid. I want a tattoo.
Okay.
But it's true. I can't tell you how many times I've thought to myself, I can't look at the reality of what's in that Excel sheet, because if I do, I'm not going to make the business decision that I need to make right now. And so I think there's a point to be made for stay stupid, believe in miracles, believe that things can happen.
Yeah, I think there's important to have a bit of that. It's the instinct bit, isn't it?
It's the instinct and the imagination. It's the power in yourself to continue to say, I wonder what would happen if. I need to stay stupid so I can ask the question, I wonder what would happen if. And that's where you have resilience as being innate, or, we like to say it's a state of being. And you're comfortable in the discomfort of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions, Mike. I know you're seated, so you're ready.
So I have to do exercises.
Cartwheels,
Kelly.
somersaults, light things. Don't worry. Like calisthenics.
Yeah.
No. It's
a couple of quick yoga moves.
You have to hold a plank for 2 minutes.
Who?
Yeah.
No. It's like, are you sitting comfortably? Who started their program with that? Are you sitting comfortably? Somebody did, I don't remember.
Yes.
What's your favorite movie or TV show that makes you feel resilient?
My favorite TV show, I love Frasier, I love Modern Family, and funny enough, I think sometimes it's important to go to bed with a smile or feeling happy. So there's a good shows to watch before you go to bed, because they generally make you laugh or make you think it was amusing. So I'm a great believer in kind of going to bed with something uplifting. Okay, so I like things that are uplifting, and I like to start the day with something nourishing. So it's like read one chapter of a book on something that I'm interested in, that I feel is a nourishment without being a chore. TV show and the movies. I think the most extraordinary movie I ever watched, in the sense that I came out of the theatre actually quite stressed, was Dunkirk.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Yes, I understand.
My God, so many emotions. And that was an absolutely genius film. And I actually had to go for a walk around the block and decompress, because it was shocking what they went through and the scenario and what could have happened, and if we hadn't got those guys out of there, and oh my God, it's shocking. It really, really got me there, that movie,
And not that long ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Do you watch The Bear?
I'm not yet watching it. I'm not
You
yet.
watched The
I've heard
Bear?
so many things, and it's won 1 million awards, but I haven't yet watched it.
Clever film. Clever series. It's really clever what they do there. It's intense. It's certainly not a comedy. All right? But but it's a very gripping, very gripping. You know. So anyway, I like that. That was a sort of long answer. I apologize, but
No, but what you've given us is a lesson that you frame and ground your day with nourishment and happiness. And then whatever happens in between, and you just let it happen.
Yeah.
That's a good lesson. What about a song? Do you have a particular song that makes you feel resilient?
World's worst. It's got. If I said to you, I greet at things, would you know what that meant? The Scottish expression is always bursting into tears, right? And a greeter, right? And I'll tell you a couple of funny stories on that one. Anybody who can sing or play a musical, I get all emotional. Really weird, right? I love the fact that people can do that. Probably something even somebody playing the piano in a station, if they're playing it well and beautiful, I think, oh, that's lovely. I want to just enjoy that. And I love it, you know. I've got a friend whose daughter's an operatic singer, and if she starts singing, I'm in pieces, all over the place. And in fact, I'm going to something, this recital she's doing, and they said, oh my God, don't you start crying, because I get all, you know. And I had a very embarrassing Sunday lunch where my eldest daughter had her friends round, one of whom was at the Royal College, was training to be an operatic singer, is now an operatic singer. And she started singing, and oh my God, I was in pieces at the table. And my wife always said to me, I've never been so embarrassed in my life. That was just the worst. So I love songs. I love music. I quite like going to, who doesn't like discovering new talent, new things, and listening to, and I flip around from jazz to classic to hip hop to chill. I'm currently into chill, very eclectic sort of music choices.
What's something in the recent past that made you laugh out loud?
Clarkson's Farm. If you've ever watched that show.
Yes. Okay.
Kelly, right?
Yeah, I know. We talked about this.
Episode 2 or 3 with the chilies was the comedy gold. Comedy gold. Right? Absolutely love that, and I do like a laugh out loud. I do laugh out loud watching the TV. My wife says, oh God, I can hear you in the other room. I think, oh, what's he watching? I do like to have a sort of hearty chuckle, love all that.
I'm with you on that. For our non-UK listeners, Clarkson's Farm is a show in the UK about a well-known TV personality.
It's on Netflix, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, who's moved from racing into farming in the UK, and it's just laugh out loud. From the farming girl here, it's just absolute laugh out loud. All right, so my last question for you is this. What is one question you'd like to leave for a future guest on Resiliency, the podcast?
Hopefully it's a nourishing moment, right? Or a funny moment. So not just some to the questions you've asked me. Tell me your most nourishing moment. There you go. There's my question.
Beautiful question.
I love it.
Oh, that's
well
great.
done.
All right, well, Mike, I get the honor of asking you the question that was left by a former guest. Are you ready? Okay, beautiful.
Yes.
So the question is, as someone who owned one of the first app companies and really understands that world, what is your own personal favorite technology or app for self-discovery or self-help?
Perplexity. You can ask it anything. I think the thing is that the skill we all need to learn is being a good prompter to an AI tool like Perplexity, and it's phenomenal, and I love it for I use it all the time for things in life. It helps answer really questions. I'll give an example of good use of perplexity. It's not to be super clever. My wife's about to change her car, lease is up. Says to me, I want to spend this much. I want to consider da 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 da. This normally would be a tour around 15 garages and the sort of painful toing and froing. Okay, you go to Perplexity, you say, what are the cars that are currently available on a PCP contract at £400 a month, right? Available in the UK and currently in stock. It tells you, right? You have 6 choices. You have this, you have that. I feel like a genius handing over answering the question, saying, here you are, darling, there's the 3 choices. There you go. They're the thing. Okay. Now, the thing with this stuff is that, of course, what you're going to learn to do is not fire it back straight away because it looks like you've not made any effort. So you consider that you've spent a bit of time, you delay, you give it a few hours, and you go, I've been through this intensive research program, and I've come up with these answers. Right? There you go.
You've taught me something huge. Don't give the answer too fast. Wait a little. Make sure they know that you were sweating over it.
Yeah, but it's invigorating that you feel you've got, but it's so helpful in that respect, for prompting it in that way and going, oh, I'll just ask that, And isn't it funny about this stuff is because everybody kind of goes, oh no, you don't want to trust it, you don't want to this and that. No, it's brilliant, it's brilliant. So Perplexity would be my current number 1 favorite. It's something I use all the time. It's great, really good.
I love it. Well, you've inspired me in many more ways than one today, Mike. I'm going to be looking into Perplexity because I myself would like to feel like a genius. But more than that, Mike, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving.
Do you know something as well, just on that, Jen?
Please.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say on that, what's interesting is that nothing's ever a new idea. It's just an old thing done differently or better. Because in 1999, I saw a pitch and we considered investing in a business called AKA, Ask Any Question or something it was called. No, not AK, it was called Ask Any Question. What would that be? AAQ or something, okay? And what they were doing was you could email or you could, call up and basically had somebody on Google on the other end who go and give you the answer. And everybody's like, this is amazing. Okay? And today is Perplexity. Is Ask Any Question. I saw that 25, 30 years ago. All right? And that didn't make it. Perplexity has raised gazillions of dollars and is a huge hit. But it's funny, isn't it? And listen, that's what's reassuring in giving people advice as a mentor. Nothing's ever new. It's been here before. This problem's been faced before. There's a path. There's a way. There's a hope,
Amen.
right? And that's what you're doing is you're just going back and going, hang on, I've seen it. Here you go.
Yeah, and may we all stay stupid enough to keep believing that the idea that was once had in 99 can come back and smash it, as your guys would say, in 2024.
Yes, exactly.
That's where the hope,
exactly.
That's the resilience, right?
Yeah.
I love
Definitely. I've seen a TED talk actually about this and it was a good piece of work because it basically concluded that the number 1 reason that things succeeded was timing. It wasn't the idea. It wasn't the fine. It wasn't the, if you think so many precursors to Netflix, what do you call it? The music app.
Spotify.
Spotify and so on and so forth, right? Napster, all this stuff. They're all there. And then, and the smartphone and all of that, the collision of kind of the internet being freely available, broadband services, better downloads, all colluded to the point where it actually could work. And so the question was an Uber, it's a timing thing. It's timing is the number one reason that things succeed. And you just sometimes got to hope you can line up the stars and get the timing right, And that is instinct over data and insight.
Yes, I was just gonna say, Mike, because it's almost less about the stars being lined up, because the stars, like nature's gonna happen, right? The trees are gonna, like, the leaves are gonna fall. Nature's gonna happen, but we're the ones that have to act. And so if we know that resilience is inside of us and we trust the instinct, then we'll know that now's the right time. So I think it really is a beautiful way of encapsulating that innateness that is resilience within us. Beautiful. Now with that, I want to give you the biggest thank you. I want to tell you, Mike, that you have inspired us and taught us a lot. And I want to ask if people would like to find you, to learn more about you, where can they find you online or otherwise?
So they can find me on LinkedIn for sure. I always used to introduce myself as I'm Mike, I'm large, I'm Scottish. But I think people need a bit more than that, right? They get me on www. and it's dot with 3 T's, DOTTT.co.uk.
For our listeners, that is .dottt.co.uk. And you can look up Mentor Mike and find him. You can find me, Jen Quater, on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. You can also find me at my company, thesmartagency.com. Find our wonderful Dr. Kelly Culver on both LinkedIn and Instagram. Also at culvergroup.ca. She is a Canadian resident and queen of all things Canada. And for Resiliency the Podcast, you can find us online at resiliencythepodcast.com, on YouTube, on Spotify, on all of your favorite channels. And again, we thank you. We thank you for listening. We thank you for continuing to learn about and expand and broaden your horizons when it comes to resilience. And we look forward to welcoming you another time. But until then, we wish you a beautiful and resilient rest of your week. Thanks again.